for 3 to 4 sets at a time, that's going to produce more of a hypertrophy response in the muscle. And remember, hypertrophy is known as maximal muscle growth, right? And strength training is not really defined as maximal muscle growth.
I'm just killing time, waiting. I'm just killing time. This whole time. Play this at my funeral. I don't need no more than I already it's easy. How many issues I'm swimming through, fishing around for the truth. This is living proof. Now I don't swim, but I...
What's going on, YouTube? You're back with the Prez. We're in Juniper Park today. In today's video, I'm going to be talking to you guys about the difference between training for strength and training for hypertrophy. Remember, at the end of the day, both are going to lead to muscle gain, both are going to lead to strength gain, right? But there is a difference between the two, and there are two ways of going about training for each one individually. So let's take a step back and let's define the difference between strength training and hypertrophy training. And we'll start with hypertrophy training. So typically you'll hear someone say they want to train with the goal of hypertrophy, meaning maximal muscle growth. Hypertrophy training, typically, if you were to look it up, would say you want to do repetitions that fall within that 6 to 12, maybe up to that 6 to 15 rep range per exercise, right? So if you're doing dips or if you're doing bench press, the goal is to be able to pick a weight where you're going to fall between that 6 and 12 rep range mark, right? And also with hypertrophy, remember, the intensity, meaning the loads, are generally going to be slightly lower, and the rest periods are going to also be slightly shorter. Now let's define strength training. Strength training can be simply defined as being able to produce maximal amount of force production. So, strength training modalities are going to fall in higher intensities, meaning it's going to be higher percentages of your 1 rep max, lower volumes. I've spoke about this many times in the past. I've also gave you guys many differences between strength training and hypertrophy training. Now, how do you train for one versus the other, and how should you go about splitting up your training to maximize the benefits of training for strength and training for hypertrophy? Now remember guys, our bodies are made up of only 2 types of muscle fibers. We have type 1 muscle fibers and type 2 muscle fibers. Type 1 muscle fibers are known as slow twitch muscle fibers. They are more fatigue resistant, meaning they will last longer before they get tired. Think about the muscle that my body is using right now currently for me to stand here and talk to you guys, for me to be able to move my arms around while I speak, right? These little postural muscles that are in the skeletal system, they're type 1 predominant muscles because, again, they're very fatigue resistant. If it required type 2 muscle fibers for you to stand up, you wouldn't be able to stand up for very long, right? But because type 1 muscle fibers are predominantly the muscle fibers that are going to, power you through these everyday movements, such as walking, jogging, standing up, sitting at a desk, holding your body upright. Those are all going to be endurance type fibers, right? Another thing you can think about, marathon runners. Their bodies are typically more slender, skinny. They don't really have much muscle mass on their bodies. That's due to the fact that their sport, meaning running, distance running, long distance running, is going to require muscles to be able to endure more time under tension, right? More fatigue resistant. Not time under tension with load. Their load when they're running is just their body weight. Remember, typically they're going to be smaller and skinnier individuals. Now you have type 2 muscle fibers. Type 2 muscle fibers are known as the fast twitch muscle fibers. They could be trained 2 types of ways. Now remember guys, type 2 muscle fibers are more fatigue resistant. That means they're not going to be able to produce force for long periods of time. Typically, type 2 muscle fibers will be able to produce force for up to maybe 2, high end, maybe 2.5, 3 minutes, depending on how conditioned your body and muscular system is. So, type 2 muscle fibers are going to be the predominant muscle fibers used in exercise, right? Resistance training. Now, like I said, guys, strength training and hypertrophy training both will lead to an increase in muscle size, meaning muscle growth, right? But there are 2 different ways the body goes about doing this, and there's 2 different ways you guys should be going about training, whether your goal is strength training or whether your goal is hypertrophy training, right? So, like I said, hypertrophy training, generally you're going to be working with lower intensities compared to your 1 rep max, higher volumes, shorter rest periods. Strength training, higher intensities, lower volume, longer break periods. And I told you, strength training can be defined as being able to produce the maximum amount of force in a given time, where hypertrophy training, you're not really focused on producing maximum amount of force. It's towards the later end of the sets where the muscles really have to work harder like they're doing in more traditional strength training. So like I said, hypertrophy training, typically your reps are going to fall between that 6 to 12 rep range. So for instance, in order for you to be able to do an exercise for 12 repetitions for, let's just say, 3 sets, you're going to have to pick an intensity that's going to be around 60 to maybe 70-75% of your 1 rep max, due to the fact that if the intensity was any higher, you wouldn't be able to hit that many repetitions, and if you did, you would be taking much longer break periods. Now remember, hypertrophy and strength are both going to cause increases in muscle size. They just go about it different ways and different mechanisms that the body produces to increase the muscle size. So I've spoke about this many times in the past. You guys can think about what's called sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, right? Which is an increase in cellular volume, fluid in the muscles, increase in mitochondria. That's going to grow the muscle, but exercises that are going to fall more in that hypertrophy rep range. Even so, more in that hypertrophy or strength endurance, where you're working up to that 15, 20, 25 rep range mark, right? That's going to cause a lot of fluid buildup, a lot of metabolites to build up in the muscle, and it's going to cause what's called sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. That's going to take place in the type 2 muscle fibers predominantly, because remember, those are the muscle fibers that are going to be producing force during resistance training. And you're going to be doing resistance training whether your goal is hypertrophy or strength building, right? So, hypertrophy, 6 to 12 rep range, lower intensities, shorter break periods, because remember, the shorter break periods now are going to allow lactic acid to build up and not disperse as all the way, right? So that lactic acid buildup, known as the burn, is what you're going to feel when you're doing more hypertrophy style training, right? That burn in the muscles, that's the lactic acid building up, that's the metabolites building up in the muscles, intracellular fluid all enlarging the muscle. That's why when you do high rep sets, you see crazy pumps in whatever muscle you just worked, right? Now strength training, guys, remember, both are going to increase type 2 muscle fiber size. Hypertrophy, typically, yes, you're going to be getting a breaking down and a rebuilding of muscle because you're going to be going through eccentric and concentric portions of the movement, right? And remember, eccentric loading causes the most muscle damage. And remember, you could think of hypertrophy training as more time under tension. If you're doing a set of 12 repetitions, controlled repetitions, that set should take you close to about 30, maybe 45 seconds if you're doing 3-second repetitions, right? 3-4 second reps, you're going to be in that 35 to 45 second total time under tension for a given set. Think about strength training now. You're doing 5 reps and you're not doing 4-second reps when you're doing sets of 5, right? Because if you could do 5 reps, 4-second rep count, you're probably going to be more in that hypertrophy range because that load that you're using isn't heavy enough to be a max force output production, right? So the difference between strength training and hypertrophy training now is the way the muscle goes about growing. So strength training, you could think about, like I said, higher intensities close to your 1 rep max. Now you're working around that 80 up to 95% of your 1 rep max, and you're falling in repetitions between that 1 and 5 rep range in your sets, as opposed to that 6 to 15 rep range, right? Also, strength training, like I said, it's going to produce growth in the type 2 muscle fibers. The way it goes about that is now it's called myofibril hypertrophy. That is an actual breaking down and tearing down of a muscle in order for it to grow back bigger and stronger, as opposed to a muscle being filled up more with cellular fluids and metabolites, which is what you get with that sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. So myofibril hypertrophy is when the muscles are actually really getting torn down, broken down, and they have to rebuild stronger in order for you to get stronger in the next session. So let's just say today my muscle is this big, right? My fist is my muscle. And the max repetitions I could do with 100 pounds with this fist, if this is my muscle, is 5 reps today. I wait 3 days, I go back and do the same exercise. If I'm able to produce 6 reps, that means this muscle grew, that muscle broke down during the initial training session when I hit the 5 reps. It repaired and got bigger and stronger, and now it's able to produce force for 6 repetitions at that given weight, right? That's the difference between myofibril hypertrophy, which is what you're going to get with traditional strength training, and sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, which is what you're going to get with that traditional hypertrophy and even that hypertrophy endurance work where you're in that higher rep range, really working on the pump repetitions, right? Like I said, intensities of the given exercise are going to be different. The exercise could be the same, so let's just say I'm doing pull-ups. If I want to do hypertrophy-based pull-ups, let's say I'm doing them with 50 pounds, right? And I'm doing sets of 10. Now if I want to do strength-based, I'm falling in that reps of 5, I'm going to be more close to that 90-pound mark, right? Higher loads, higher intensities, but again, for me to produce maximal effort to get 5 repetitions every set, the break periods are going to be much longer. Now let's think of it with body weight strength training, right? So let's just say front lever work. So let's talk about the front lever. If you're training for the front lever and that's your goal and you're able to do a front lever, that's going to be producing a lot of maximal strength in one isometric position. You're not going to be able to do a maximal effort front lever hold, rest a minute and a half, and then produce the same amount of effort. So let's just give an example. I'm going to go for a front lever right now, right? And that wasn't even a good front lever, right? And I only got maybe 3 seconds of hold time right there. Maybe 2 to 3 seconds of hold time. Now, if I was to go back up in 90 seconds to 2 minutes right now, my rep would look even worse than the first rep, right? But let's say I wait 5 to 7 minutes. I'm going to get a rep that's going to be equivalent to the first repetition. Because in order for me to produce that rep, I have to produce maximal force output in a given motion, right? So a front lever, a planche, handstand push-ups, those body weight strength-based movements, they're going to require high demand of force production in a given set. Now, if you're doing easier movements like body weight pull-ups, or if you're at a more advanced level and you can do weighted pull-ups, the weight that you're using is going to determine the modality of muscle building that you're going about, right? So if you could do a weight for a 6 to 12 rep range, that weight is going to predominantly produce more of a hypertrophy response. Yes, obviously hypertrophy builds muscle. So obviously if you're picking a weight that you could fool in that 6 to 12 rep range for 3 to 4 sets at a time, that's going to produce more of a hypertrophy response in the muscle. And remember, hypertrophy is known as maximal muscle growth, right? And strength training is not really defined as maximal muscle growth, but more maximal force production. But like I've said many times in the past, if you are stronger, you can rep out more weight in that hypertrophy rep range, right? So let's, like I said, pull-ups. Let's just say I could do a 100-pound pull-up for 5 repetitions. That will translate over to me being able to do 50-pound pull-ups for 10 repetitions. But let's just say I could only do an 80-pound pull-up for 5 reps. Then I would only probably be able to pull 40, maybe 35 pounds for 10 repetitions. So the stronger you are at higher intensities, the more translation over it's going to have into more hypertrophy-based training. Now, as you guys know, me personally, for the last almost 5 weeks now, I've been on a strict strength training program where I'm being coached by, you already know, Matthew Zlat, with the goal of getting stronger in the specific movements, weighted pull-ups, weighted dips, overhead pressing, and squats. Those are the only movements I'm training, along with some muscle-up training, not every session, whenever I could get the work in, right? So one thing that I learned over this period of 5 weeks is what I used to do is different than this, right? I used to do what's called dual undulating periodization, where I would mix up strength training and hypertrophy training throughout the week. So one day I'd be training for strength, one day I'd be training for hypertrophy, one day I'd be training for more endurance, and I would cycle that back and forth. Yes, that produces great results, but what it doesn't produce is optimal practice with the heavy loads, right? So what I've been doing now on this strength-based program, all I'm doing is a strength training, the same exact workout every other day or every other day, right? I'm either taking 1 or 2 days off between sessions, and every session, the goal is for me to add weight to the given exercise that I did the previous set, right? So weighted pulls on day 1. On our first day, I was doing 55 pounds. We just hit session number 10 and we're up to 81 pounds for 4 sets of 6. So being able to constantly hit that same movement and progressively overload every single workout session is a different stimulus than that dual undulating periodization, which again, there's nothing wrong with it. That's gonna keep you more prepared to be overall well-rounded, right? But with this focus session on, when I'm just purely focusing on strength training, at this time, my endurance work will most likely have a drop-off, right? When I go back to it, I'll be able to rep still, I'll still be able to get high numbers, but the endurance amount, the way I could superset sets, the way I'll be able to do pulls, push, dips, muscle-ups in one clip, right? That endurance base will fall off. But that's the beauty about cycling through things without dual undulating periodization. So let's say I'm on the strength-based program now for 3 months. The next 2 to 3 months after that, I could go back to pure hypertrophy or pure endurance work, right? And cycling through those modalities, it's a different way of going about your workouts than splitting it all up throughout a given week, right? So remember, strength training and hypertrophy training, they're both going to produce bigger muscles. They're both going to produce stronger muscles. The stronger you are at a given weight, the more you can rep out at lower intensities. So again, like I said, if you could get strong at 100 pounds, you're going to be even stronger with 50 pounds, being able to produce more time with attention with a heavier load. So the stronger you get, the more translation over to being able to rep in that more hypertrophy rep range. So I hope this gave a little insight of the difference between going about training for strength and training for muscle growth. But again, they're both going to train for muscle growth. Just remember, you could define hypertrophy training as training for maximum muscle growth, and you could define strength training as training for maximum force production. So it's probably been about maybe 3-4 minutes since that last front lever attempt, just before the video ends. Let's see where we're at right now. See, still not 100%. I did train yesterday. I had a weighted pull session, and every session is full body, so I am a little fatigued. But the rep wasn't worse than set 1, meaning I rested enough time to produce the same amount of force. Now let's just say I go back up right now. 20, 30 seconds later, I can even barely get to horizontal. So you can see, guys, when the intensity of the exercise, whether it's a bodyweight exercise or a weight-bearing exercise like an overhead press or a squat, or whether you're doing levers, planches, bodyweight muscle-ups, if they're hard for you, take longer break periods, focus on getting stronger. The stronger you get, the more you're going to be able to rep out down the line in the given exercise. Like I said, I hope this gave a little insight between the difference between strength training and hypertrophy training. If you have a question or comment, leave it in the comment section. I always get back to you guys. Share with your friends and your family. If you're not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button. Hit the bell so you know every time I drop a new video. And like always, guys, peace out. Let's get stronger and bigger together. BARNATURALS.
No sad story, I ain't here for a symphony, no sympathy. When I was on the bench, you wouldn't sit with me. Now I'm on the court and I'm balling, my time's coming.